So hopefully, there we go. You're all seeing this. So there's my little opening slide, and Sean was very uh, generous in helping me sort of frame this presentation. I'm going to move things around here a little bit so I can see myself. Maybe not. All right. Well, hopefully you're all seeing this. Um, so here are my bullet points. First of all, I want to talk about why should a secular group reach out? So what's the point of uh, trying to work with religious groups on campus? And what should we be working with them toward? That's kind of the second bullet point. Some of the challenges we faced in our group, our secular group is called FAMSU. It's Freethinkers, Atheists, and Agnostics at Mississippi State University. Things that other groups should be considering before they jump in. Then how do you find out who to work with? And then I'm going to give some examples to kind of tie things up near the end. So the rationale, in my mind, is especially for a group like mine in the Deep South, demographically, non-believing students are a tiny, tiny minority. A believing student comes onto our campus, and they've got a zillion communities that they can join together with. They can join together with the Baptist Student Union or the Wesley Foundation, Chi Alpha. We've got the campus director of Chi Alpha joining us today. There's a bunch of different choices, but for the non-believing student, there's not that many. And so we have to be more visible. People have to know who we are in order for the students to be able to find us. And so partnering with well-established religious groups on campus is a good way to get a little bit more exposure. And it also helps to expose the believing student to what a non-believing student is. A lot of believing students have gone their entire lives never having met a free thinker, an atheist, an agnostic. I want to make sure. Let's see. Y'all hearing me? I'm not seeing.
Yeah, I can hear you just
Okay,
fine.
all right, cool. I thought
If
it
you
went away
could,
for a second.
there's a little
Yeah,
screen sharing icon in the middle of your slideshow. If you could move that down to the bottom, that would
gotcha.
be
Okay,
helpful.
there we go. Maybe that's one. Let's see.
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
All right, cool.
Perf.
So, like I said, a lot of believing students may not even be familiar with, what does a non-believing student look like? What do they believe or not believe? And so having these conversations, building these relationships helps to kind of normalize things. Um, Now, the advantages to the secular group, in my mind, is that it keeps us from getting into an echo chamber. It's all too easy, especially when we're a small minority group, to only want to hang with ourselves. And while that's important, you need a critical mass of people who at least may not have the same exact worldview, but have similar non-belief, to make to have a cohesive community. But there's the danger of becoming exclusive and only kind of hearing your own ideas and not uh, being open to other ideas. So it's, in my mind, a pretty good check and balance, to have people in your group that are either actively religious or perhaps having been raised religious, but now are starting to ask some questions. Really, the way we frame our group is that we're open to absolutely everybody. Um, Anybody who's interested in talking about religion and its impact on society, politics, et cetera, are more than welcome in our group. And historically, we've had times when there's been more believers in the room than non-believers, just by virtue of the demographics of our campus. So obviously, one major common cause that we could link arms with with a lot of Christian groups, and I should mention that we'll talk mostly about Christian groups when we're talking about believers, but and we've perhaps not done a good enough job of really developing relationships with the Muslim groups on campus, or perhaps the Jewish groups on campus, other faith groups, we need to do a better job. But obviously, the Christians are in the majority here, so those are the ones that we mainly talk to and talk about in our meetings. But Christian nationalism, in my mind, is a really good cause to find kind of commonality. I actually just kind of lifted some quotes from a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, essentially where they make the point that Christian nationalism is not in line with what most folks think of as Christianity, and certainly it is not in line with the Constitution. And so there's this kind of weird melding of in Christian nationalism. It seeks to merge Christian and American identities, distorting both the Christian faith and America's constitutional democracy. I think a lot of Christians and non-believers can find agreement in those kind of statements and have an interest in protecting religious liberty, the liberty to practice whichever religion or none at all, as the founding documents stated. Okay, so some of the challenges that we've faced so far, and we've really been only doing this over the last year, actively reaching out to religious groups, trying to build these relationships. Obviously, there's going to be some level of suspicion. Stuart may be able to talk to this when I only got to meet him almost a year ago at this point, and he didn't. I'm not sure how familiar he was with BAMSU. I certainly wasn't familiar at all with Chi Alpha, and so we just kind of met by virtue of being involved in a pretty big public event. And but anytime a non-believing group perhaps approaches a group of believers, I think there's some justifiable suspicion. Why are they talking to us? What do they want to? And so it's really important to build the relationship first and establish rapport. Get to be friendly, and before you start talking about any other perhaps more sensitive subjects or diving deep into theology or philosophy. Another challenge we faced was trying to get, once I started to reach out to believing groups, I invited them to some of our events in the fall, including we had a documentary screening. We also had a couple of speakers that came in, and the speakers were Christians. And I didn't get the turnout that I wanted. And it's possibly a failure to promote events as well as, that's a secret sauce that's sometimes difficult to figure out. But ultimately, I think one of the weaknesses was just our scheduling. We've always scheduled our meetings, or for the last couple of semesters, they've been on Wednesday evenings, which is great for heathens, but not great for religious group members because they're likely busy on Wednesday evenings in small groups or some other sort of meeting. So we've actually shifted our meeting time to Friday evenings for this semester, just kind of as an experiment. And sure enough, it's worked for a couple of our friends. Stuart Woods, like I said, he's hanging out here. He's going to come speak to our group next Friday. Actually, this Friday, 21st.
Yeah,
So
it's this Friday. You got me Monday and Friday.
and then we've got Truman Loop from Bridgeway. He's going to be coming in late March. And we also, because these are, the representatives from religious groups on campus, and the hope is that some of their folks in their groups will come to our meeting and lend them some support and give us a larger audience and more people to meet and get to know and that sort of thing, to again kind of break down some barriers and get to know each other. Other guests we're going to have this semester on the 28th of February here, we're going to have a professor here on campus, Dr. Vandenhever, who's a secular guy. He actually got into some drill field arguments with the Connectleys when they were on campus last spring. So I'm kind of curious to get his impression of that experience. He's also South African. I would love to get his take on Elon Musk. So, so not all of our meetings are, this semester are going to be with religious guests. We're going to have some non-religious guests. We've got another speaker lined up for April, who's the director of the Starkville Community Theater. And the reason why I reached out to him, his name is Gabe Smith, is that he's a He recently found out that he's on the autism spectrum. He's in his 40s and was diagnosed within the last year and a half to be on the autism spectrum. And some of our members, I think, are on the autism spectrum. My own son is on the autism spectrum. And so I'd love to kind of get his perspective on what's that like to, first of all, live a large part of your adult life feeling odd, feeling perhaps neurodivergent, but not knowing that you're neurodivergent. So again, interesting things hopefully coming up this semester. What should you keep in mind when you're organizing these sort of presentations? If you've invited a speaker, or if you've invited, again, believing students to your group, make them feel welcome. And this not only just for believing students, but also non-believing students. Try to avoid cliquishness. If you got a new person, you don't want to love bomb them and be insincere or disingenuous, but certainly make them feel welcome. Make them feel that their ideas are valued. We kind of run a Vegas style rules in our where you're free to say whatever and things stay in our club. And so if someone does not want to be identified, if someone doesn't want it be known that they came to the atheist meeting, then that confidentiality is kind of a rule. So make them feel welcome, respected, safe. That's really important. As far as speakers, the optics really do matter. So we've invited a couple of Christian speakers, and while we've, I think, done a pretty good job of asking challenging questions at times, in my mind, it's really important to not be antagonistic. Even if you don't necessarily agree with something that the speaker may have said, I think it's really important to not kind of fall into a where you could be perceived as being adversarial or antagonistic. It's just not good optics, especially because some of these things are going to be recorded, and you don't want that kind of out there living on the internet. The nice part about having them recorded is that, yeah, you can ask challenging questions during the course of the presentation, not going over that line of being debating and that sort of thing. But because it's recorded, there's still plenty of time where you can watch those recordings and talk, use that as fodder for future group discussions. You don't need to solve all the problems or hash out all the logical or rhetorical problems in an argument in the moment. You can let it ride. And one thing I found really useful is to solicit feedback. If you have people who are visiting for the first time, make sure you get their contact information and then follow up. Make sure that you say, hey, if you were in the audience, did you enjoy the time? And did you feel respected? Did you feel like your opinions were being valued? Was the speaker treated kindly, fairly? Did they, and I like to ask the speakers, did you feel like you were able to make all the points you intended to make? Sometimes when there's question and answer sessions, it's kind of tough to think on your feet in the moment. Is there something, do you feel like you maybe didn't answer something as completely as you wanted to? Solicit those kind of things, because the whole point is to try to make the environment better for the next visitor, for the next speaker. And we're only going to be able to improve things if we get some feedback from the folks we've already had. This is an example. This is actually from the up top here. It's my YouTube page. Christian podcaster visits secular student group on Mississippi State campus. This is the November speaker we had. Is a guy named Bill Wortman from Birmingham, Alabama. And I don't get that many views, nor do I get that many comments. But especially if you're a leader of your secular group, keep an eye on your group me. Keep an eye on your social media. People, even if they're not going to be rude face to face, like in the meeting, they might create a welcoming environment, but then they might be really rude thanks to the anonymity of social media. So keep an eye on your group me. Keep an eye on YouTube comment section, which is where hope for humanity quite often goes to die. You notice this particular person, I don't know who Guitarist 67 was, um, most likely just a random person on the internet, not necessarily someone in your group, but this person said, the world has less and less room for religion and its bullshit like this guy every day, referring to our speaker. That's not what I'm hoping for. In live in our meeting, in our group me, I wouldn't want that kind of an attitude. And so I responded. I tried to nip it in the bud. I essentially said, I wanted to thank our speaker for his willingness to visit and share his story. And all commenters should keep in mind that other believers may read these comments. So trying to nip things in the bud and call people out for being essentially rude. So I say, you'll note that the students and I asked a number of challenging questions during the evening. Everyone was cordial. That is the environment I aim to create and maintain. Nothing would please me more than if the comment section reflects this ideal as well. Try to set the tone, try to model, and then be vigilant. Okay, so how do you figure out who to talk to? There's a couple of different ways. In some campuses, you're going to have an interfaith dialogue group. We have one here at Mississippi State. There's a group of faith-based groups that get together usually once a semester, I think, for like a luncheon. And your group may be part of that. Or if it's not, try to get on board. Try to find out who organizes that and say, hey, I want to be on the email list. I want to know when this luncheon's going on, because that's a great way to network with folks. So, go to the luncheon, get a free lunch, and then don't just talk to, your president and vice president shouldn't just huddle in a corner and talk to themselves. Use this as an opportunity to meet the faith-based groups on campus, get to know their leadership, make some contacts, get some contact information. These are the people that could potentially be speakers at your group. These are people that could potentially you could work with on their projects. They may be doing some volunteer efforts that you'd like to be involved with. Maybe they're doing a tutoring at a school. Maybe they've got a soup kitchen sort of thing. And especially if your group is looking to do some volunteer work, why reinvent the wheel? Find people who are already doing that thing and pitch in as well. So that's a good opportunity to do that if that's already established. If your school doesn't have kind of an interfaith group, another great option is student involvement fairs. We have one at the beginning of each semester where all the different groups on campus, religious and non-religious, set up tables. They're trying to get new students or transfer students to join their clubs. And so this is, quite often, sometimes they're laid out where all the religious groups are kind of in this one little row, and then there's the engineering club, and but in any case, you can just kind of wander the room. Don't just stay at your table. Obviously you want to try to recruit people, but also use this as an opportunity to network. Find the other groups on campus. Find out who their leadership, who are their active volunteers, and give them you make some contacts and invite them to be speakers at your group. Other things you can do, obviously, are do some tabling. Most folks enjoy tabling. I love tabling. We just set a table up out in the drill field for Ask an Atheist Day or whatever, and make sure you have a welcoming and inclusive kind of elevator pitch. When people are curious and will come up to your table, you can have a few stickers, but also say, hey, we really want you to come to our club. Whether you're a believer or a non-believing student, if you're interested in talking about religion, ours is the club for you. If you really kind of enjoy these kind of topics, feel free to come to our group. Another place to look for these groups is quite often your student government will have a student group directory. Ours is called Cowbell Connect. That's another way of finding some folks. Okay, so now, Stuart, do you recognize yourself here?
Yeah, I looked good with the panorama perspective.
So want to describe what this is?
Yeah, so this was so we had a student named DJ. He's the one in the plaid and the khakis there on the stage, involved in our campus ministry, and he would also go to FAMSU meetings. A relationship with a couple of the students in there. And so we had a different student. He said, hey, I got Cliff Connectly's phone number. He's interested in coming down. Can we host him? I'd never heard of Cliff and Stuart Connectly. I had no idea who they were. But I love if a student has an idea, I want to empower them, right? And give them ownership and kind of any way I can resource their ideas and want to do it. So I did some slight vettings with some peers, right? Hey, are these guys crazy or not? And a couple of my peers in Chi Alpha World said, no, they're good people. So I was like, all right, let's host them. I so when I made the reservation on the center of our campus, the quad, called the drill field. When I made the reservation, you have to put expected attendance. And I put like 5 to 10 is what I put because I don't know. You guys I'd look yeah. So anyway, so they come out and before they ever come, BJ said, "Hey, FAMSU meets on I don't know if it was Wednesday nights or Thursday nights last year.
It was Wednesday, yeah.
Um, Wednesday nights, yeah. So you think Cliff and Stewart would be coming to the FAMSU meeting. And it's like, oh, sure. In my head, it's like, 10 to 15 people. Cliff and Stewart will walk in and we'll just kind of have a discussion. And so Cliff and Stewart come to
And
campus.
that was
And
my
it's a,
that was my impression as well.
right. And that's
That was what
how,
I was
right.
expectation.
And that's how, and so next thing you know, they come to campus, they go on their quad. And it's like 100 people out on the quad to hear them. And my whole day is just navigating the university saying, hey, you got to stay off walkways. You can't. And so it kind of gets this Cliff and Stewart are going to the Atheist Club starts to get framed as a debate. And it was never supposed to be a debate. The goal was, hey, it's a guest, right? Bob talks about bringing in guests to his club to speak. That was kind of the intention behind it. And as you're getting rapport around, like you're hearing things on campus, and it's like, oh, big debate.
Right,
And
flyers
so
are
that
being
was
passed out.
right. And so it's like that was never, yeah. And so it kind of ends up getting put into this auditorium um, on campus. This is probably one of the largest, probably the second largest auditorium on campus, I think,
Right.
behind the theater hall. Um,
When I arrived
and
that
so,
evening, there was a divider that broke things.
uh,
I took this picture, I think, right after the divider was removed. So initially, when the discussion panel started, it was just I only saw half the room, but it was packed. But there was students over here we just couldn't see. We could hear them, we just couldn't see them. And then they eventually they removed the divider.
and so, like, I don't know, I don't put a percentage on it. I'd guess probably about 75% are there. Bob puts it really good way, right? The whole God's not dead, oh, they're debating an atheist type deal, right? And so 75% of the rooms may be there for that, which was never, our goal was never that, right? Our goal was, and I think Bob handled it really well that night of just introducing, hey, here's different ways you can approach it, right? And just starting the conversation. The goal was never there to finish the conversation. The goal is, hey, let's start a conversation, and then we can keep it going in different mediums and different environments, whether it be a FAMSU meeting, whether it be you met someone new tonight who has a different perspective. Let's talk about it over lunch in the union. And so I would, again, when you're in Mississippi, right? You're going to have that crowd that's going to check out as soon as Cliff is done talking, right? But I think there was
Right.
a good chunk there was a good chunk in the room who really did receive it how it was intended to be received. And I think Bobby got some positive feedback from students. And then
Right.
that's ultimately how Bob and I met each other, right? My first time meeting him was at this night. I had talked with a couple of the students, the president, Gabe, and I don't know if Ralph is on the e-board or not, but I had talked with them and met them in different environments. This is actually my first time meeting Bob, but so this is kind of what kicked off our relationship.
Right.
So it kind of blew up much bigger than we ever intended. But and kind of with that came consequences we never aimed for. But I think we've done a good job. Hey, what are the good things that come out of this, and how do we continue to run with that?
Yeah. Yeah, but we wouldn't have this had that panel not happen. That's why I kind of say at the very top here that first of all, the panel discussion wouldn't have happened if we weren't already open to religious members. If DJ wasn't already coming to our group, he wouldn't have set it up. And then had the panel discussion not happen in front of 700 students there, all of a sudden, and I've talked about that, I had a lot to lose because again, I'm the instructor. I've never watched the God's Not Dead movies, but yeah, I know the Kevin Sorbo character is the atheist professor who apparently belittles and goes after believing students. And my assumption was that the audience there they had that in their head. That was the preconceived notion they had. And so I'm now the Kevin Sawyer. I'm being cast in that role, being up there on the on the panel, whereas no one else had as much to lose. Gabe, our president, you know, he's a student who's going to graduate in a couple of years, no matter how things happen. And the Cliff and Stewart, they're on a plane on Friday. They're heading back to Connecticut. Whereas I've got to continue to teach, and I've got to have students. I don't want students dropping my class. I don't want students not signing up for my classes. I've got 3 kids in the public schools. If my name becomes mud, then that impacts them. My wife was extremely worried about what the fallout might be. And so it wasn't until the day after I got an email from a student. Actually, I taught astronomy the next day, and a number of my students had been in the room. And they were like, "Wow, we learned something. It was so nice to see a conversation and not not a yelling match, and that sort of thing. And no one's knowing the tempers didn't flare, and they really appreciated that. Even believing students appreciated the fact that you could handle these kind of conversations with decorum. But I really like this particular student said that she wanted to reach out and thank me and Gabe for engaging so eloquently. Thank you for your representation of free thought and Mississippi State. I even the executive assistant for the president of the university, who actually the president's office got involved and made that space open for us. But she knew my wife. My wife used to work at a store downtown and made the connection between me and my wife. And the next time she was in the store, she was like, I'm a Christian lady. I'm a devout believer, but your husband did such a wonderful job, in that moment. And that was, good in my mind. That was high praise. So, obviously this is the way that Stuart and I got to know each other. And then once I was kind of outed in front of 700 students, I kind of ran with it. I thought, well, gosh, now's an opportunity to actually, to kind of hide and worry about anonymity. I'm essentially outed in front of a large part of the campus. Let's lean into it and let's start to build some relationships. So Stuart and I met a couple of times afterward to talk about what went down and what the feedback was, what the word on the street was. And then I reached out to Truman Loop from Bridgeway Church. And what I liked about Truman, he sent me an email today just saying, he said, what I appreciated most from our initial meeting was the effort you put in to get to know me, my life, and my family before we jumped into any intellectual discussion. For me, that was important in building trust. And so, again, that's feedback that I think is useful to other groups that want to do this. Yeah, become friends first. Sit down, have a cup of coffee, and don't even talk about religious doctrine or have a debate. Just get familiar with each other, enjoy some coffee. I do include some links here. I made a breakdown video of the Connectly panel discussion. I also have a link to, these are just different things we've now done based on this initial panel discussion last March. Now we become so much more active. Fall 2024 was our most active semester in doing things, including not just having our regular meetings, but screening a film, having outside speakers come to talk. So we had one of our members, his father is a preacher and teaches history and Bible at a private school in Meridian, Mississippi. So he came and gave a talk about deconstruction and fundamentalism. There's a link to that. So it was recorded. Then a Christian podcaster who it's been so many good things that occurred based on the Connectly panel discussion. Had the panel discussion not happened, our group probably wouldn't have gone to the Secular Student Alliance national meeting in Little Rock last June, but we did because we were just so fired up and so energized. And you learned a heck of a lot at the SSA in Little Rock, but also made this connection to Bill Wortman, who's a Christian podcaster who happened to be there, was interviewing people, interviewed me, interviewed interviewed another Mississippi State student. But anyway, he came and was our speaker in November. So a lot of good things have occurred based on that initial panel discussion. Things that are coming up now. Obviously, I talked about the fact that we've got a bunch of speakers coming up this semester. We also have a collegiate day of prayer happening at the end of this month, in fact, 10 days. And Stuart and I actually talked about this because as a secular group, I'm not sure what to do. I'm kind of open to ideas. Stuart and I had coffee last Monday, and I think it's DJ, the same guy who organized the Connectly, or at least got that ball rolling. He's doing the Collegiate Day of Prayer as well. And I think this is a good opportunity to uh, utilize the relationships you've built to then get different perspectives. Because I'm curious as to what is a Collegiate Day of Prayer? Why is it happening? Why? What are the motivations behind it? What are the expected results from it? And if we just had the conversation in my secular group, we might all kind of get into that echo chamber. Whereas if you have some relationships built, you can talk to the people. I sent a message to DJ, but I didn't get a response from him yet, to get his perspective. What are you hoping to get out of this? And Stuart, do you have any ideas? Have you talked to DJ about what the intent is?
When he responds, tell him to text me back too. So yeah, I mean, I think if this is an interesting point that kind of came up in our cup of coffee last Monday. It's just the wide range of answers you'll get to that question. Why are we doing the prayer? What do you hope to get out of it? Um, Maybe I didn't know there was a Christians against Christian nationalism, but maybe I should sign up for that one because I agree. I've fallen to that bucket, right? So, but that means my why might be different than
Right.
uh,
Yeah. And actually,
someone else's, right? And so,
even
for me,
before we
when I look
yeah.
at, yeah, for me, I look at, our faculty advisor works in our DEI office. It's not called DEI because if you called it that in Mississippi, it would have been shut down years ago, right? So they call it something else. But right, so he's under a lot of stress right now, right? Is he going to have a job next
Right.
semester? Is his department going to have funding, right? So, part of me, it's just praying for um, needs on our campus, So from my perspective, right, I believe God is an active, right? So for praying for certain needs on our campus, like that one, um, uh, and then just overall praying for hope within the students, right? So those are my prayer needs. But
Mm-hmm.
again, you ask why and what do you hope to get out of it to everybody there? You'll get just a very wide range of
Right. Right.
responses to that
And that's
question, and
that's
that's kind of what we talked about ways the SSA could get involved in it.
mhm.
Um, is I thought I think it'd be cool. Thought Phoenix. I thought it'd be cool if you go up there with the little microphones and the phone, and you just kind of did a series of just asking people there while they're there and something like that. But I'd be interested to
Yeah,
know.
I think that's an excellent idea. In fact, and that's why I included this. I went to the Collegiate Day of Prayer website, and just kind of lifted this. As the students go, so goes our nation. If we win the spiritual battles across our nation, but neglect our college campuses, all our progress will be undone in a generation. That's very kind of militaristic, but that may, and that's that's the tone of the umbrella organization, and that's maybe the mission statement or the vision statement, but that may not be shared on the local level. And it's all too easy for a secular group to just look at the CDOP website and write it off, or think that it's got a certain agenda when on the local level that may not be the case. And again, you're never going to know that unless you have these conversations, unless you get a chance to talk. But I think your point as far as recording, just having little interviews outside of the event. Hey, why are you guys here? What are you praying for? How will you know if your prayers are answered, or how will you know if the prayers don't work? Um, you know, Not in a gotcha or a punked, sort of way, but expressing genuine curiosity. Um, because sometimes people don't think about those sort of things. They may just be there because it's a social event and they feel obligated. Hey, all my friends are going, and uh, without a real reason for going. And so I think that's a really useful suggestion as far as a way that a secular group could respond. Again, not in a confrontational way, but actually in an information gathering way, and a way of, again, building dialogue and having, we're always interested in people really thinking about why they believe what they believe, and those kind of
And that's like,
conversations might be a
yeah,
good opportunity.
because you'll get just people. If you did this at Mississippi State, one of the things a student would, a common response would be, well, for revival. It's like, okay, like what is that? Yeah, I don't even know what that is. It's just something that we just say because it sounds good. And so I think, okay, well, like, what do you mean by that? What do you, and again, going back to like, well, what does that look like? How do you know if a revival or an awakening has happened, right? And then now we're getting into, you know, actually good conversation, right? So even students within my campus ministry, like I want them, to be able to answer that question. And not trying to start a cult, right? If I wanted to start a cult, I would say don't do it. But that's not the goal here, right? I want our students thinking about it, thinking, why am I
Right,
here? Why
right,
am I
right.
praying? Do I really even believe what I'm praying? Or am I just saying it because this is what I've heard other people say? So,
Yep. And so we'll have this. This will be one opportunity coming up, and then another month, um, we'll have an apologist, a guy named Frank Turek, who again, I'm perhaps a little bit more familiar with Frank Turek than I was the Connectleys. The Connectleys I had never heard of before. Frank Turek, I think I've seen at least one old debate. Christopher Hitchens, I think, and Frank Turek were debating. So that, Hitch has been dead for a decade now, maybe. Um, so that kind of tells you how old that debate is. So I really don't follow Turek's career, but he's coming in a month, and so that one, again, what is a secular group to do when a fairly well-known apologist comes onto campus? Um, I've already RSVP'd, so I'll certainly attend. I have no interest in debating with Frank Turek, but I certainly, like all of our, if I had to ask the question, I would say, because he has a book called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist," I think is the name of the book. That's the presentation that he's presenting, and he says that he welcomes questions. And my question, for Frank Turek or for pretty much any of our believing uh, speakers is just, what convinced you? You hold a belief in a God to a fairly high level of confidence. This man has made a career out of it. I'm really curious as to, what convinced you. I'm not asking you to convince me. I'm just really interested in what you found so compelling that you've made it a major, major part of your life and part of your identity. And so, I guess that's, the question for secular groups is, yeah, do you attend this sort of thing? I don't think there's I'm again, you'll find all kinds of people with different ideas about, free speech, but I'm pretty much an advocate for free speech. Now, I think that uh, free speech does not mean consequence free speech, and ideas, I believe, deserve, in many cases, to be challenged. Oops, sorry. Um, but anyway, so that's something to come that's coming up that, is an opportunity as well as perhaps a challenge, um, as far as, how to respond or whether to attend and that sort of thing. Um, the other thing I wanted to bring up is, with the guests that we've had so far. Like I said, we've had two speakers, one in October, one in November, and I did send them each messages after they came to speak. Did you feel comfortable? Did you get your points across? Is there something that, some loose ends that didn't get tied up? Did you feel welcome, et cetera, et cetera? And I got responses about those from that line of questioning. But then I did follow up with some questions that I had that I really didn't voice in the moment, either because it hadn't occurred to me, or I thought might be a little too challenging. Like I said, I didn't wanted them to feel welcome. Didn't want to grind their gears over every little point. But I sent them messages. What I've got here scrolling is notes that I've made over the videos. I've watched the videos and made notes and some questions, et cetera, et cetera. And I would love to continue the dialogue and have conversations about the content of their presentations in a little deeper way, and I've not gotten responses. And so that's a challenge for me, is how to continue the conversation and have some real substance to it. It's one thing to say, well, yeah, I felt comfortable, but let's actually I want to learn more about your perspective here. Why did you say this? Why, and so I have I think I've got about 11 pages with Ralph Henson, and then I think for Bill Portman I have like 9 pages of essentially just kind of went through the video and put little timestamps and little comments and that sort of thing. I don't want to dissuade future speakers from coming and having their thoughts recorded. I'm if they don't want to engage, I can't make people engage in conversation. Maybe down the road, we may have conversations within our group about these. Maybe we'll pull out the old video and let's go through it. Let's spend 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Let's go through this and examine these arguments and these apologetics and that sort of thing. Maybe of some educational value for our group internally, but I also don't want to have invited speakers afraid. Oh, I don't want to. I don't want to show up because I don't want to be recorded and be taken to task for what I say. I don't want to create that kind of environment either. For me, it's about learning and better understanding someone else's position. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Stuart? Since you'll be talking to us, are you open to being recorded? By the way, we haven't discussed that.
No, I don't. I went viral a couple times on Instagram. I learned how harsh the internet can be in the comment section. So I stay off posting videos now. That's to my friends. Um, but no, I mean, I think overall, I think the biggest thing is just that genuine relationship, right? So I know where Bob's coming at it, right? And I've even after there was a really big event, some out of towners came and did an Christian event. They did in our basketball stadium. Um, and I remember the next day meeting up with Gabe, who was the president of FAMSU at the time, and we just talked about it. Like, hey, how did you perceive this? Here's kind of how I perceived it from my perspective, right? But because we had that relationship, now anytime there's kind of an event on campus, there's a relationship there to talk about it and talk about different perspectives. And that's we're coming to a FAMSU meeting. Like I know Bob's not there just to like, you know, get you right.
Right, right.
Um,
And I
Set
think
a trap. And so,
I,
but because we have that relationship, right?
exactly. I think even with our invited speakers, they were kind of coming from the outside. So I didn't have the rapport with them, so they don't necessarily feel that same obligation to continue the conversation because they're at a distance. And yeah, Ralph Henson. I had him over I feed them lasagna before. In fact, I need to feed you lasagna, I suppose.
I'm
Um,
lactose intolerant, so
oh, okay. Well,
it'd
we'll
be
come up
all
with a
right.
different plan. But I've invited them to have dinner before they've done their presentations. But that's been about it. So we've had all of an hour to get to know each other, whereas before they've presented, and so there's not that same uh, frequency of communication and proximity as well. I know that I can text Stuart and say let's grab a cup of coffee and we can make it happen. Maybe not just drop everything and do it that afternoon, but later on this week or next week. So we have a different
Or you
level of
can
rapport, I
text me
think.
and say, "Hey, the Pirates are first in the NL East, or NL North, right? Your Central Division." And then we're a month into the season. That's pretty crazy. And we'll just talk baseball. So I don't
Right.
know. It's fun.
Yes. And that's important. And that's actually one thing that I should mention. I will probably, I don't know what our time frame is here. But one thing I've really appreciated, with Stuart is that we've shared resources with each other. Like you watched the Leaving My Father's Faith documentary,
That was really good. Yeah.
which Bart Campolo and Tony Campolo. That means a lot to me. Because I'm one of these sharers. I will share uh, links and videos and that sort of thing. And I appreciate when they're shared with me as well. Stuart turned me on to this podcast about the rise and fall of Mars Hill, which I would not have known about. And I think that's rapport there. That's when you, and I don't get that always, when I'm trying to build relationships with believing either students, individuals, or leaders of faith-based groups, sometimes it's kind of formal, and I feel like not necessarily my things that I offer aren't perhaps valued. Whereas when Stuart said, "Hey, I watched that documentary," that says a lot about Stuart. The fact that he's valuing the things that I'm putting out there, and vice versa. So yeah. Any questions? I guess we can open it up to other folks if anybody's out there in internet land.
Yeah.
I
Oh, sure.
no, go ahead.
No, you please first.
Okay. I was trying to turn on my camera. I am, everybody here already knows I'm trying to start up a chapter on my campus, and I'm still in the recruiting phase. And you mentioned tabling and how fun that is. And personally, I'm not great at the small talk, and I don't like going to parties I want to just talk one-on-one, But so I'm not great at small talk. I'm much better at talking about politics and religion. So I wonder what kind of things you might suggest, like if you were going to make a top 10 list of um, comments or questions that would spark a conversation. I can remember one person said, comment on their shoes. You like your shoes? Where'd you get them? But I mean, can you think of other, small but not trivial things to start up a conversation about when you're trying to recruit
I,
for anyone?
yeah, I have an acronym. So I hate tabling. When Bob says he loves tabling, I go, good for you, man. I hate it. Like it's just ugh. But yeah, man. So, but what I love is that, hey man, if we sit down over a cup of coffee or just sit in the student union, right? Like and we get down one-on-one, that's fine. There's an acronym I use in my head all the time. It's called INFORM. And so N is name. That's easy. You start every conversation, hey, what's your name, right? Easy. And then F is family. And so you're just asking questions about their family, right? Where are you from? Did you grow up there? Have you ever moved? You got any siblings? How old are they? What do they do? Was it weird being the youngest? And then you just go on, right? Based off the response, you're just asking a question when we're clearing the response. O is occupation, which in the college context is what do you major in? Why'd you pick that major? Is that, all that good stuff. R is recreation. What do you do for fun? You got a Saturday with no homework. How you going to spend it?
Mhm.
What do you watch on Netflix? No, for real. Like, what do you actually watch, right? When they say, "Oh, I don't do anything," okay, but you got to do something, right? And then so you're going through all these, and based off their responses, you're asking a follow-up question to go a little deeper and a little deeper. And then M is mission, which is what's the reason you're having this conversation? And maybe it's like, well, hey, I would love if you came to our meeting, or hey, I would love to meet up again in the future. Or, hey, let me get your contact information. We can stay in touch, right? And so it's just an easy way to close it. So
That's
Yeah.
it's just
great.
a way to kind of get to know someone on a genuine level beyond, hey, I like those shoes. But yeah. And
And
it's not
Dale,
like doing it from like a programmatic way. Oh, okay. F,
Well,
family, where are
but
you from?
it's a nice
Okay,
flow
oh.
too. It's a good, it's kind of like boom, 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 boom.
right. And Dale, I'll mention, we we'll connect somehow outside of this, but I like to listen to. I just mentioned the Campolos. Bart Campolo had a podcast called Humanize Me, which I absolutely love. Now, Bart was he followed his father into ministry and then left when he was about 40 and continued. He was the secular uh, chaplain at the USC campus, and then he was secular chaplain at the University of Cincinnati, which is now where he currently lives. But couldn't make a living doing that. But he was, very good at, like Stuart, doing more what Stuart does. I don't do that. I'm a teacher, whereas, he was a secular chaplain, so he was dealing with students, just, trying to recruit them into his group and building a community. And he's always been a community builder. But he has a podcast which is very much like this, how to just initiate conversations. And and he has kind of a similar process to what Stuart just described. He actually throws in, when he's talking about childhood, like he throws in, like, when you were like, when you first remembered something, the earliest memories, was yours a
It's a
happy
fun
home
one.
kind of a thing, that sort of thing. What did that look like? Did you have a pet? Those sort of things. because everyone likes to tell a story, and that's a good way to just kind of get a conversation going. Let them tell their story.
Yeah, and then sharing your story just to kind of break the ice, like, oh, okay. Like,
Mhm.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to make it an interrogation. There's definitely got to be some back and
I do.
forth.
Yeah, that's the part I struggle with. Is like, man, are they just thinking this is like a job interview right now? It's got to be so weird. And so I'm always trying to like break that. Like, hey, we just be cool.
Yeah, I think sometimes it helps to be very transparent with that process where you literally just state the elephant in the room, right? Like it seems like, you might be a little uncomfortable with me asking you all these questions. Maybe you're wondering why, right? I just think it's important for us to get to know each other, feel comfortable with each other before we, talk about whatever, insert thing, right? An event
Right.
that's happening or talk about what I'm doing on campus. Because I find that with young people more and more these days, particularly in the younger generation, which, certainly not all students are, in this up and coming generation, but I find that more so as an organizer, someone who's been using sort of stories and open-ended questions and, things of this nature to connect with individuals that students are becoming more closed off to, sharing some of this personal information with somebody they've just met, right? So I think sometimes just kind of like airing that out in the open, like I'm, recruiting, so I just kind of want to get to know you a little bit, can help kind of soften that interaction a bit, make it feel less of a like an interview, like you mentioned, Stuart. Yeah.
Right. And I think it kind of goes without saying, and maybe I should have been more explicit, but there's such a value to having like these kind of genuine conversations to humanize each other. Yeah, because it's all too easy to treat that other group and dehumanize them. And once you start actually sitting down and having a conversation and realizing, hey, Stuart just got married. He's I went to his wedding, and he's dealing with now combining his stuff with his new wife's stuff and figuring out navigating the early stages of marriage. And I've been through that. Yeah, that he's living a real human life experience that I might have something to share with him. um and that when you realize, hey, we're just human beings, we're just trying to get through the day. We may have slightly different theological positions, but we put our pants on one leg at a time, that sort of thing. That really helps to resist that temptation toward tribalism, I think.
Yeah, that's what I mean, Bob, when you emailed me about this Zoom call today, and it's like, hey, why do you meet with me and have coffee? It's like, because you're a human, like, it's not, and that's just, there's value in that alone. So,
Yeah, we're not each other's project. That's another, perhaps um, and maybe, and I'm probably projecting, the Christian, that, oh, I've got to save this person, and I don't want to be somebody's project. I don't want them to feel like they're my project. I just want to have conversations.
I have a little tidbit there I could add in based off of my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, as someone who's done a lot of in-person organizing, including a lot of tabling, and had difficult conversations with folks that, came from completely opposite perspectives of me, and finding a way to still build that relationship so that we come to see each other as people, not as folks that are just coming from widely different points of view. And hopefully this would be helpful for you, Day. But one of the things that I do that became my trick that I would pull out of the bag every time I get an opportunity is to relate my experience to theirs in a way, no matter how different our perspectives are. So like one example is I worked on a political campaign where my candidate was very strongly supporting measures to help the homeless community in Los Angeles. And you would meet some folks who were very against that point of view when I was doing organizing for them. And so you would meet folks who say like, I think these folks are it's their own fault. Why would the state, local government, et cetera, put resources into helping people that can't help themselves? And so what I would oftentimes say is like, look, I hear you. You're coming from a perspective where you think that, from what you've seen, these folks aren't doing enough to help themselves. And so why would the state help them? But from my perspective, I've actually known folks who were in these exact circumstances, and I saw in my own personal life how getting that extra bit of help was able to really be beneficial for some of these folks in the long run. And so by just acknowledging their position and then stating my own personal experience, which is slightly different, it's putting us both on, instead of being two camps that are sort of at war with each other, it's a little rhetorical trick of putting us on the same playing field and saying like, look, you have a different perspective, I have a different perspective, but we're on the same field. We're trying to sort of figure this out together. And all of a sudden, it rhetorically means that instead of us being antagonists, it's like we are now both sort of trying to head in the same direction. And I found that any conversations that result after that point, like the sort of animosity would be taken down a notch. And all of a sudden, people are more open to hearing my ideas just because I accepted their point of view as being different than mine, while stating like, hey, here's where I'm coming from and here's why.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were clearly stating you were understanding them, and that you were making it clear to them that you were trying to understand them, which that's really important. When people love to be heard, and they're very sensitive when they know they're not being listened to.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, right, it is in the interest of, interfaith groups on campus to generate discussion, as much as it is our groups on college campuses. Ultimately, they're out to do the same thing, create community on their campuses. Certainly there'll be groups on college campuses that are looking to create communities that, would expel voices like ours, but there are certainly equal, maybe not equal, but I probably equal on a lot of campuses, number of faith-based organizations that are open to hearing those voices. And so there is like that, in context of this conversation, that is the playing field I think Chase is referring to. Like we are all in the same, we all have the same goal, is to create a community on our college campuses. Um, Well, I wanted to I'll actually ask a question back to, what you were mentioning earlier about how to respond to this National Day of Prayer and maybe conducting interviews out front or, something along those lines. The first thing that came to my mind were these interviews at Trump rallies that you see going all around, these gotcha kind of
Right. Hmm.
interviews. And I think that whole like pwn the libs, pwn the Republicans or whatever. I'm not
Hmm.
super big on social media because of that very reason. But I think it's become so ingrained in the way we talk about politics and religion. So I'm just curious with that in mind. What are some of the questions or prompts, if not, the attack or the gotcha moment? What are some prompts that you feel like would be useful to, stimulate conversation versus stimulate hatred and division?
Hmm. Yeah, and of course, I'm a scientist, so I'm always looking for verifying and falsifying. And so, my question is, especially, when the Instagram promotion reel, is, I'm praying, I'm praying, I'm praying, I'm praying, I'm praying for Mississippi State. My question would be, well, what are you praying for? And Stuart, addressed it, but that's his answer, and I'd really be interested in, what are other people's answers, and how would you know if your prayer was effective? How would you know if your prayer was not effective? I think it's maybe a question that someone has never really thought about. And I love those kind of questions. I love when I'm asked a question that I had never asked myself. And one of the examples that I gave when I did the Connectly panel discussion was something I've done for my own teaching, where I was doing a demonstration like I normally would always do semester after semester, and a student asked me a question that I had never asked myself about this phenomenon. And it turns out that I had the physics wrong, and it was a beautiful moment. Had I not been asked that question, I would never have thought to ask it of myself. And so, I think it's a really human and actually a compassionate thing that you can do for someone. Again, if it's done in a sincere way. Um, because some people might just say, "Oh, I'm praying," but not really think about, well, gosh, why am I doing this? And how would I know if it was effective? And if it's not effective, then why am I doing it? Um, yeah, I think that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think just not asking like leading questions, like those Jimmy Fallon clips or those ones that you see on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, right? And then it's kind of like leading you and baiting you into an answer based off like what we know the facts. And it's just clearly we have someone who hasn't done their research, right? So we're just kind of baiting them to reveal that they haven't done their research
Mhm.
and then editing it in a way that kind of, yeah. And so, um, but I think, I don't know, you just try things with the genuine part, right? How someone interprets that is on them, not on you, right? And so if you're going about it in a very genuine, open-ended, looking to learn type of way, there will be those that will interpret it as, oh, they're trying to get us, but like, I mean, that's on them, right? That's not what you were trying to do.
Mhm.
And so I think just any prompts that are from that genuine place of learning, uh, I think you'll land in the right spot.
And I was curious,
But I'm gonna,
specifically for used to it real quick. I know we don't have much time left, but for students who are looking to identify specifically like Christian faith-based groups on their campuses, what are some things to look for as far as groups that would be friendly or versus not friendly, or what most people would refer to as like progressive or not progressive or whatever. Like what are some, I don't know, descriptors or things that students because I'm someone I'm not familiar with really Christianity at all, really. So I would not even know what to look for as far as
yeah.
um, this is a group that I could feel comfortable reaching out to. Um, is there any sort of knowledge on your part of groups that would be friendly to our students?
I think one of the biggest things, biggest indicators is what level of access do you have to leadership, right? Whether it be in the form of a pastor, um, maybe a lay person who takes more of a leadership role. Like, what level of access can an outsider get to leadership? And if leadership is exclusive to those who are the most deeply involved, that's probably a red flag. But if leadership is pretty accessible from someone from the outside, that's generally tends to be uh, more of a healthier indicator. So if you can get, no, I mean, people got schedules, right? People got things going on, right? And the higher
Mhm.
up an organization, the more congested your schedule can be. But that person who has a congested schedule, but still sees that text message, sees that email response to it. Like if you have access to that person as an outsider, that's a pretty healthy indicator. From my experiences. And I've had a lot of trouble finding churches, right? And so I'm kind of answering this from, what, just for me trying to find Christian community, right, can be a bit of a struggle. And that sounds really funny, but and so, but that's kind of one of the biggest things, I think, and that's my opinion. Yeah. And
And
just
That's
probably another
helpful.
thing is just how willing they are to share their story, right? If you feel like they're hiding something, um, yeah, I don't know. If they're just willing to be open, upfront, honest, and not try to hide things, that's probably another good indicator.
I also think it's important to also be like uh, I haven't had that much success with cold emailing the Wesley Foundation, United Methodist. I
Also, I haven't. So,
you haven't
let
either. Okay,
me,
yeah, and
uh,
and so they didn't respond to like just a cold email, but at our last student involvement fair, they had a table. So I went over and I said, hey, I introduced myself, and they were like, hey, we've got this thing called Alpha going on. Mondays, every Monday. Um, it's to ask questions. I was like, I love to ask questions, and so I've been to one. I think our student president has been to two Alpha sessions. So I think showing that, hey, I'd like them to come to our FAMC meetings, but that also means we got to give a little bit. We should attend some of their events. There's nothing wrong with that.
actually, there is this theme in Christianity where it's all about coming to our space and it's only ever an invite to our space, and it's never willingness to go into anybody's spaces, right? So it's whatever event we have coming up, and you need to come to our event and step into our church, like our church or whatever our place of worship.
Right,
And so
right.
another indicator's willingness to step into other spaces. Are they people who they seem really friendly, but are they just being friendly so I step into their space?
Right.
It's and that's I don't want to stereotype, but it can be mainstream of it's always an invite to step into my space, but never a. And
Mhm.
so to Bob's point, like Christians can
Right.
do that very thing, right? Where it's, never willing to step in any other spaces other
Right.
than their own.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the resources. Like, when I share a link with you, you're actually going to actually open it and take a look at it. When you share a link with me, I'm likely to look at that. And sometimes I get the feeling that, oh, I might share content and that person's never paying any attention. They're gonna try to hit me with a bunch of stuff, which I usually will. Like, I'm always interested. Whatever someone sends me, I'm willing to at least take a look at it. And I don't go through chapter and verse of, if they send me 20 Bible verses, I'm not going to necessarily go through each one, but I'm willing to put an eyeball to most things, and yeah.
Yeah, also with what students in your group, like if they've gone to something, how have they felt, getting student feedback? Like
Mhm.
a student went to this ministry and they felt comfortable, versus I went to this one and felt like a project or felt like another number. So I think just students are really good at reading the temperature of a room. And so I think getting their feedback.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's helpful. And I think like also like you may find people like yourself, Stuart, who are like, I'm actually looking for community within my faith and can't find it. And like not so much that you have that problem on your campus, but it sounds like you've been bouncing around different churches and things looking for a
I
place.
have in my past. I mean, I got a spot in
Okay.
Starkville where I've really, but before I moved down to Starkville, I've had, yeah, that experience for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like dialogue around that too is can be important. And I think like sometimes we're as, atheists or non-believers, like very focused on convincing folks that we're right or something. Versus like saying like we can both be right at the same time and have similar goals. Or like affecting change within a Christian organization or a religious organization. Um, not so much that I, have a disdain for your beliefs. What I have a disdain for is the way that those beliefs are placed into action by folks that you may not even agree with. Um, and so I think that can also affect change within religious organizations on campus, just having those dialogues, because oftentimes folks don't feel comfortable within their own space, talking about how they may be excluding other groups or, they may be perceived by other groups or the harm that they may be causing on campuses. And so sometimes just, having those conversations, I think could be a way for us to affect change versus having this very much like we're not having an impact if we're not pulling you over to our side, right? Change comes in kind of small ways, I think.
Well, and even helping someone recognize their own privilege, because quite often you get into, especially when you're a majority group, it's so easy to think, oh, this is just the way things are. And to as a minority group, build those relationships and almost be able to kind of make someone realize, oh, yeah, maybe I am acting from a position of privilege and not even know that I'm doing it. And it's not until somebody actually raises a hand and says, hey, yeah, from my outside perspective, yeah, you kind of are. And I think that's useful in helping people kind of check themselves, but they're not going to necessarily do that unless they have dialogue with people who are from outside that bubble.
Any other questions or thoughts on this before we hop? I want to be, respectful of everyone's time, certainly. If there's any other questions, we can go over those. We'll wait 5 seconds. All right, we're going to end this meeting. Yeah, thank you so much for hopping on, particularly Stuart. Super grateful for your presence with us today. Bob as well. We're grateful for both of you, and we aspire to create these interfaith dialogues on our campuses nationwide. So we do hope that when students receive this training, via email through our, closed station, we don't broadcast this to everybody, but when students receive this message, that they are encouraged at the type of relationship that the two of you have seemed to form. And I think it is very helpful to have you both here on the call. Even just to see how the two of you interact and have built your relationship, I think is really quite inspiring. And I hope that that can spread, because I do think this echo chamber is on both sides of this. And I think that it's important that we come together in these times and not continue to allow politicians to divide us by faith, religion, origin, national origin, race, sexuality, whatever the thing may be. So yeah, thank you so much for being here.
And I'll mention it, Dave, please feel free to reach out if I can be of any assistance to you.
Thank you.
I can provide my perspective, if nothing else.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okie dokie. Well, thanks again, you
Pleasure to
all.
be with you.
Yeah, thank you again. You all have a good one. Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Thanks, Sean.
Bye.
Bye-bye.